On this episode of the Novel Turtle Presents, I have a conversation with Jeremy Janus about his photography and how he wants to inspire others. So, Jeremy, tell us how you got started in photography.
So the way I got started in photography was with drawing and painting originally. So when I was about 20 years old, I started in drawing, and then that turned into painting. I did my first wall mural when I was 20 years old, and then put my first canvas together when I was 21. And it was really just the continued development of drawing and painting over the years, which eventually turned into doing drawings and paintings for children's hospitals in the Southwest US. And I think I'm up over around 75 total that I donated over the years. So I
Wow.
started doing that when I was like 27. And then eventually, I went through a lot of anxiety and depression, and I spent a ton of time in nature. So it kind of intermingled with my drawing and painting eventually, which led to a friend telling me that I'd be great if I got into photography. And he pretty much yelled at me to buy a camera, and I did. And so it really did just it overlapped over the years, and it was a lot of intermingling. And the vibrancy and colors really come from painting and drawing, and I bring those into my photography now. And it's really in my head, it's just like a circus going on between the two. But it's kind of a melding of the art and photography world all in one.
Right, yeah. I find it interesting that you've really only been doing photography for what, 5 years or so?
uh, a little over 3.5 now.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay, even less
yeah.
than I thought.
Yeah, so
And
I
you're,
started in September of 2016.
wow, okay.
Yeah.
Which is really awesome to me because I feel like when you do follow your passions like that, you kind of things tend to progress a little more quickly. And especially like if you have a goal in mind where you already had the background of art and everything, like you know how you want your pictures to look and you kind of can line them up a little easier. So
Yeah, I
that's
completely agree. And I think too, the other component of that too was I started sharing my art so long ago that um, it really sped up the process of not being afraid to share my photography as well. Because I think when you're first starting out, it's that you're in your head so much, and you're so afraid of, oh, people are going to hate this, or they aren't going to embrace it. But I think when you already bypass that component, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to keep producing, I'm going to keep throwing things out there, and people, you start to care less about what people are thinking versus what you want to put out in the world and what you want to give back to others too.
right, right. And I think in one of your posts, you called it analysis paralysis. Um, how do you keep from getting stuck in your head about things and keep from having analysis paralysis with things?
I think it's a constant battle that you're always challenging yourself with that, especially when you really push outside your comfort zone. I think if you I get told this all the time, that I try to eat the elephant whole. And I think when you actually try to take that step back and you do it a little bit of a bite at a time, it's like, okay, I have this huge goal up here, but I'm gonna make sure I take one step toward it. And it's the same in sharing things, right? You're not gonna go from sharing this beautiful landscape to going and sharing this crazy abstract that you've never even like shown the world before. So I think it's kind of these little tiny steps that you go toward it, and then eventually you're so comfortable with kind of going outside your comfort zone that that next step isn't as hard as that last one was.
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Because I know a lot of us get stuck there, especially like I know we've talked before about, creative type people don't really love being in front of the camera and they don't love telling the stories. But it's so interesting to me to see your Instagram and to read your blog posts that you have on your website and to actually hear the stories because that's part of the part of art that I like is to really hear the stories behind what did you see, when you were taking that picture, what did you, what were you looking at, what were you trying to take a picture of, did you get what you were supposed to get, all those things go into it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's more of especially if you're a very cerebral person, there is so much going on at one time that sometimes it just that ends up being one picture out of 50 that you took during that time you were kind of in that zone and really focusing on what's in front of you.
Right. Yeah. So well, tell us first a little bit about your Skillshare class.
Yeah, so my Skillshare class, I was actually just going through the timeline on this the other day. I signed up for Skillshare in March 23rd, I believe, was when I first signed up. I got approved kind of for their like personalized coaching program on the 31st, and I've been working on it ever since. I literally just finished it on like Monday night. So it was basically 2.5 months of just filming, trying to condense everything down. And so the reason I started it was all my artistic endeavors pretty much fell apart at the same time. My gallery in the Denver International Airport like got postponed the week of basically printing everything off. I had a bunch of art talks I was going to do, stuff like that. So I kind of went into this little funk once COVID hit. And then I was just like, all right, I've been talking about doing this class forever. Now I have the time to kind of sit down and focus. And I honestly thought I was going to be able to knock it out in a week. And that definitely didn't happen. I kind of was just like, oh my God, this is so much more work than I realized. I mean, when you're pulling in audio clips and taking audio clips, and then your inflection and your voice starts getting all messed up, like there's so many components that go into it. But really, the thing that I noticed when I was on there was, you get a lot of photographers that either go way too in depth. I mean, there's classes on there that are 11 hours long, and that's great. I don't have the focus for that. So for me, it was really just being able to take something and condense it down to uh, really information and concepts that people can understand and discern very quickly. And actually, it's ironic that kind of feeds back to my background in food science, because it was always about how do you take this very complex information and distill it down into a level that people can actually understand and can utilize. Because I think that's a bigger sign of intelligence than anything else, is like, how do you help other people to understand at this, and then you build on that, right? You're not going to understand these super complex concepts right away. It's going to take time and energy. And so that was really my focus, was like, okay, how do we break this down to the molecular level and then build up from there? So you kind of explain the fundamentals and concepts of shooting photography and understanding lights and shadows and how those all interplay. And then you build on that. And it's like, okay, you take these concepts and then you put them into a situation like shooting a sunrise or sunset, or shooting a lake, or shooting a waterfall. And then that's kind of on you as well to be able to conceptualize that yourself and say like, okay, how do I make this one situation better after I have this basis for learning and the knowledge base, really. So I don't know.
Right.
I just look at it like, I if I was starting out, that's what I would have wanted as far as information went in one spot. But I'm so excited to be able to help people with it. It's seriously like, so brings me so much joy thinking about it.
That's awesome. And I think that's another thing that a lot of people, they don't really think about, or they overthink it maybe. I don't really know how to say that, but a lot of people who say somebody wants to get into photography and they're like, "Oh, there's so many photographers, how am I ever going to make money? How am I ever going to do this?" But really, like, if that's your passion, if that's what you want to do, I feel like you're going to find a way. Like, there was videos out there already, but it wasn't something that spoke to you. And if it didn't speak to you, there's others out there that are just like you, that are going to, hear from you something that they wouldn't hear from somebody else because of the way you're saying it, the way you're presenting it. And I think that that is something that a lot of people miss a lot of times, is just because it's already been done doesn't mean you can't do it in a different way. And that's really cool that you did that and you took that initiative and you saw that need and stepped in.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing though, right? Like a necessity, like the saying, I can't remember the quote directly, but it's like, necessity is the innovator of creation, and it really is true. It's like, if you look at these different niches that aren't filled, it's like that's how people become millionaires and billionaires, right? You're helping a million people It's like, so you got to think in your own mind, like, how do I creatively help people and actually add value to them too? It's not just something that you think yourself is going to add value. It's like, it's actually going to add value to them.
Right. And I read something the other day that said, was talking about abundance and how most people go about it the wrong way. Like they try to seek out, what they can get, what they can, how they're going to make money, how they're going to do this. But really, they should flip it around and look at how they can add value to the world, like you're saying. And
Yeah.
then the abundance comes because of that, because you're adding value to people's lives. So
Yep.
that's really cool.
And inherently too, right? I mean, a lot of artistic endeavors do end up being kind of a self-serving, you know, for lack of a better term, selfish endeavor too. I mean, like nature was, I mean, that's like in my heart and soul, and I feel it, and like that's since the day I started shooting, I knew it, and but when you start being able to take that and it's like, okay, cool, like selling photos or being in art galleries and seeing the way it evokes emotion in other people. Like there's outlets for that stuff. You just have to be creative and think about different ways that you can actually add that value to other people too with it.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that I really like is the fact that, a lot of people try to focus on, well, I just need to sell my photography, I just need to sell my pictures. But you've had your photos in a lot of different places that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think about.
Yeah, I've been lucky. I mean, part of that is relationships. My friends that own Coupe Vodka, I ended up getting my labels on their labels because my friend was my lab partner in college. Stock photography. I've gotten a lot of things. When I first started in photography, I put everything I had on stock, and it was basically to try to get your name out there. It's kind of like your own marketing tool, right? And with that, I've only been doing that for like 2.5 years, sold over 5,000 photos in 50 countries on 6 continents. So
Wow.
there's a lot of that. But then the new stuff that I have, I really don't put into stock anymore because I'm more focused on fine art with that. So those going into galleries, I actually just went and picked up some prints right now. I got into 3 galleries in the last 2 weeks. So I
Wow.
just started doing galleries this last year, and this is going to be, by the end of that, that'll be my 7th gallery that I've been in so far. So there's like a lot of outlets. It's just like thinking critically, and it's like, how can I go about this? How can I work with other people? I mean, even on my coffee bags that I started doing, I started adding my photos on there. So there's just a lot of different creative outlets. It's just you gotta really think critically on them.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I think the other thing that has probably helped you too is the fact that people can see that love of nature through your photography. I know a lot of people would be like, how would you see something through photography? But really, if you see it, you can see your passion and your feelings towards what you're shooting. You can see it through your photography. So
Thank
that's
you.
really cool.
I appreciate that. That means a lot. And it is something though, I mean, when I see it in nature, it evokes emotion in me. So that's what I want to do for my viewers too. And every single photo that I make, that is my end goal, is to have someone else be like, wow, like that is so beautiful. I want to go to that place myself. I think that's what I try to tell people too. It's, you get people that want to go to all these exotic locations, but it's like, there's so much beauty just in and around you too. It's just, you got to reframe the way you look at the world, or notice that little nuance that no one else would have too.
Right. Well, and I think, I don't remember if it was at the end of your class, but you said something about changing your perspective.
So we kept throwing around all this stuff, and it was just like, yeah, change your perspective, inspire the world, because of all my days that I went through anxiety and depression. And I am a different person now just because of all the years of growth and development that I've spent. But essentially, it was a lot of the things were just changing the way I looked at the world, or changed the way that I had my perspective, which is tough because when you're younger, you don't really have as much. And so, and a big part for me too is, I always say, like I want to inspire the world through my lens. So whatever I'm shooting, I want to be able to bring that to the forefront and kind of inspire the world too with that. So I don't know, that's pretty much what that came from, but it really is true. Once you change the way you look at things, it starts to change the world.
Yeah, it really, yeah. I I wrote that down not only to put with the posts and everything, but I have a little book of quotes that I just write down and I put it in that too because
Oh, awesome.
it's it's just beyond true. And it's like you say, when you're in the middle of something like that, you don't really think about, oh, well, I could just change my perspective. It just seems too easy.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy thing at all, but it kind of is in the same way, I guess. It's kind of
Yeah.
complicated.
Yeah, it is. And it's that constant reframing, right? It's like, you got to it's like cutting negative thoughts. It's like, you got to stop your brain. It's like, no. And you make that conscious decision over and over and over. And the more you do that, the easier it does become. I mean, don't get me wrong. We all have our hard days and our hard times and everything, but if you can stay in that positive space more than the negative space, it really helps to continually change your perspective on it too.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, having somewhere to channel that, like you have through your art and through your creativity and things, I feel like that is so beneficial and people don't really see that sometimes. Um, so that's really cool too, that I think you're showing that to people.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think right, like it's funny that everyone thinks being creative is such a gift, and it is. It's one of the biggest blessings in my life. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, in a lot of ways, if you're a creative person, you can't just shut it off. It doesn't just stop. It's like, okay, like I have all this creative energy in me. I have to do something with it, i.e., make coffee or you know do these different things and try different endeavors, because otherwise it's like your your soul is dying inside. Like, you have to let that creativity out. You have to harness it in a creative and beneficial manner for yourself and for those around you. And like, it's honestly what all this stuff comes from for me.
Yeah. And speaking of coffee, I know you had said that basically when everything kind of got shut down and the Denver airport thing got shut down and all of that, coffee was something that you wanted to make anyway, but kind of tell us about how that came about.
Yeah, so really it's been a couple of years that I've wanted to make coffee anyway, but when we went to New Zealand, it was there wasn't really any great coffee. It was a lot of instant coffee just because of the way that the island's set up and everything, and they just dilute down their black coffee, so everything is like a long black, and it's just not good. And so we went to Wellington, and I've had like my first couple of good cups of coffee, and there was a siphon there where it actually used a Bunsen burner down on bottom, and it siphoned the coffee up, and it
Wow.
actually had this crazy like artistic and like food science type of feel to it. So it was the first time I saw that. I was like, this is awesome. Like, I need to like really implement my food science background. So when we got home and after everything kind of ate it, I was just like, I was bumming around playing video games or whatever, and it's just like, all right, I got to stop. I got to be creative again, and so I bought a coffee roaster, and I just started roasting coffee right away, like doing a lot of reading and kind of understanding beans. I mean, they're awesome. Like, it's a complete sensory experience. I mean, you're listening to it, you're smelling it, you're watching it. So coffee roasting is very much like a lot of other food science type deals for me. So I was really just kind of molding all that into one, and it was giving me kind of a outlet too. And then the creative side of that too is like, okay, well, I can't just like throw this in a bag. Like, my mind won't ever let me do that. So I need to create these labels, and I need to source bags, and I need to source the tins, because when I first started them, I was putting tape on them, and they look so cheesy and just cheap. And I can't do that. I mean, like, everything I do, I want to be high quality. So that was kind of it. Really, just all comes back around, and it's just a full like, how do you create this piece of art basically that you're okay with the world seeing too. So that's really what it all comes.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, right? It's what got me into the beer industry in the first place too. Was like, okay, like how do you create flavors that make people change their entire perception of something, right? Whether that's beer or coffee or any type of food. And I love that. And you're a part of someone's life and their world at that point too.
Yeah. Well, and it's that whole like evoking an emotion. Because I
Yeah.
mean, smells and, drinks and certain things are all connected to like our emotions and, past. And
Yeah.
it's crazy how it all connects. It's been fun going back through your Instagram and just looking at your pictures and reading your stories and all of that.
Honestly, like it's crazy because if you go back to my first pictures were 0 words, like very basic, whatever. And like that was part of the process of sharing more too, It's like I'm actually I'd say I'm more like lean toward extrovertism now, but I am an ambivert. And so for me, I'm very methodical. I'm very it takes time for me to process thoughts. So I can like step back, take that step back, and that's why I love writing. Is it's a very uh, much longer process, much more methodical. And so for me, Instagram is a perfect outlet because it's like, okay, I can take that step back.
That makes sense. And
Yeah,
that shows too, I mean, like seeing it evolve, if you follow your whole Instagram like from beginning to now, it kind of shows you like dipping your toe into things little
yeah,
by little rather than getting stuck in the analysis paralysis and just being like, oh, should I post a whole story? Should I post a picture? Should I do this? So
yeah.
that's really
Yeah,
cool.
and you still deal with that sometimes, but I think it's just pushing past that little bit of discomfort and knowing like, okay, it's not as bad as it built up in my own head too,
Yeah.
which I think gets in all our ways. I think that's a artist's like internal, mechanism too that kind of holds you back sometimes. But once you let go of that, then it's just like, oh my God, like this is so awesome.